The Business of Art, brought to you by the Video Department. So you were telling me about your day. Tell me a little bit more about your day today.
Yeah, my day today was very busy. I mean, it often is. I typically work from home. My firm has a physical location, but it is in a location that is not super convenient for all the clients we serve because they're all over Virginia. And it's a little bit inefficient, right? If I'm going to drive in to work to meet with one client and then drive back home and work from there, it doesn't usually make sense for me to go in. So the good thing about working from home is because it's so efficient, I can schedule back-to-back meetings. The bad thing about it sometimes is that I do that. And so I did that today. In addition to this, podcast today, I'm speaking tomorrow to the Public Relations Society of America, to their independent practitioner section. And so I was going over my outline of what I'm going to say with them, the questions they've sent in. So that was part of my day. And then other than that, it's just been client fire after client fire, back to back to back.
What are you speaking about at the public relations event?
So because it's specifically independent practitioners, it's kind of like solo or small firm, right? That's the kind of analog for them. So it's common concerns that they should be thinking about in their everyday life as they go about the day-to-day of their businesses, things that they might not be considering to protect themselves, right? So common clauses they should be on the lookout for in a contract, because a lot of times when you're a solo or an independent practitioner, you're just getting other people's contracts, right? You don't have the power or the leverage necessarily in every situation to insist on using your own contract. So it's some things that they should look out for, in other people's agreements that could trip them up or cost them liability. It's some things that they should be considering with the subcontractors they're working with or the people they're working in collaboration with, because a lot of times these are people who, they've got somebody who's creating a logo, but they're creating the ad campaign, right? And then there's a video component. And so there's all these copyright and trademark implications and intellectual property ownership issues, right? And that's comes up very frequently with subcontractors they work with. So what clauses should go in the contracts they typically do control, which are their own contracts with their subcontractors. The difference is in intellectual property, right? Like, what is a copyright? What does it protect versus a trademark? Things like defamation, because when you're making public statements, you want to be careful about what you say because you don't want to get sued for it. So, and then, kind of basic stuff like entity formation, business succession planning, right? The things I talk to every business owner about, what you should be thinking about moving ahead and looking down the line. So I'm very excited about it because it covers a lot of topics. It's actually fun. I'm a huge nerd, so I think it's very fun to talk about all of these things. So I can't wait.
And when you introduce yourself, how are you going to introduce yourself? What are you going to say?
I'll say hi. I'm Brandy Brown.
There it is. We have Brandy Brown here on the podcast.
Yes, I am an attorney. I work in Richmond, Virginia, all over the state, but in Richmond with small businesses, large businesses, and nonprofits. And so I'm at a firm called Dunlap Law. We're a full-service business and nonprofit law firm. So we provide, everything from contract drafting and review to employment issues, nastygrams if people aren't paying you, which is a little bit common, sadly, cease and desists, all the way up to really complex issues like comprehensive IP strategy, buy-sells, corporate counsel, right, structuring equity, all of the fun stuff. And we've got other people at the firm who do things like, wills, trusts, and estates, because your interest in an LLC or your shares in a corporation are personal property. And so you got to figure out what's going to happen to those. We have a real estate attorney, so we've got commercial real estate. We have a civil litigator, a little bit of everything. So when I say full service, I really mean it.
And I've always wondered this. Brandy and I are in the same networking group. That's how we met. We've been in the same group for now over 3 years, I think, right?
Yeah.
How long have you been there?
I want to say 2021 is when I joined. So this is my third year.
Yeah, I think we joined right around the same time. What is the threshold that somebody would owe you money where a nastygram would make sense?
So it kind of depends. Litigation, right, which a nastygram can be the first step to litigation, right? Litigation is, in general, very expensive. It is very stressful. That's a big one that people don't think about when they're so fired up they want to go into litigation. And it can be very expensive, right? Because if you've got to pay your attorneys to dig through discovery, to prepare pleadings, to actually appear in court, all that good stuff, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So with a nastygram, it kind of depends, right? We flat fee them. And the flat fee is going to fluctuate based on, well, what kind of investigation into the situation do we have to do? What kind of research? Is it just a straightforward, you've already got all the facts. They owe you money under a contract and they haven't paid you, and, we can figure that out. That's going to be a lower flat fee generally than something we have to put a lot of time into. So really it's all a matter of balancing whatever that flat fee quote is against what you're owed. And sometimes, depending on your contract, you can also, if someone hasn't paid you, you can recover late fees, you can recover interest, right? So that might factor in as well. That's why I think it's really important that we do free consultations, because it's, if you call and you talk through what the issue is, what you're owed, what's been the history of the matter, you can get a better idea of whether or not it's, worth it for you, quote unquote, although legal advice is always worth it, to pay for a nasty gram, right? Versus just kind of letting it go and saying, well, I'm not going to collect this money and it's gone forever.
I've told you about a situation I'm in. Obviously, we won't get into any details, but yeah, I think it's the threshold's just even too low. It's like just a couple $100s at this point, or like a few $100s, where it's like the stress that it's already caused us, to me, is worth not dealing with it anymore.
Well, and that's the thing too. A nasty gram is not the only remedy, right? Theoretically, you could go to small claims court, right? There's a lot of other stuff that you could do where, okay, is that just going to be in this?
Huh?
That you doing that? Is that just going to be in this?
Well, it wasn't going to be in the audio until you said something.
Okay, well, great. Well, awesome. Well, peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, peek behind the curtain, everyone. I just adjusted a cord.
Very, very deftly. So someone who is really doing a good job on behalf of the video department, as you can see, knows what he's doing. Anyway, so there are other options too, right? Where if the threshold is not really high enough for you to hire an attorney to have that nasty gram written, well, number one, you can write your own, right? So there's always self-help. Number two, there's small claims court, which you don't need an attorney for. There's a lot of different options that you could explore before you would even need to get to that step, but you can't know which one's going to be best for you if you're just kind of guessing.
Yeah. And the small claims court I looked into, it in this instance, it's particularly difficult because the person is difficult to lock down their location.
Yeah.
If we knew exactly where they lived, it might be different.
That's
but
actually,
we don't.
That's not as uncommon as you might think.
Yeah.
Being able
For people who owe money.
Exactly. They're on the move. So being able to get a hold of someone, figure out where you're even going to serve them with service of process if you're going to do so, notice of a lawsuit. But then also, once you do get a judgment against somebody, well, that's not the end of the road. There's enforcement of that judgment. Exactly. And so some people are what we call judgment proof, which means they don't have any money. So you could have, $1 million judgment against them, and maybe you're never going to get that. So the time, stress, money, those are all factors that go into figuring out whether or not you want to pursue something, when it comes to litigation or when it comes to legal action. But so is like, how realistic is it that you're really going to get paid by this person?
Yeah. In our instance, it's less than 1%, I think.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
But I will say, so one thing we see a lot with newer business owners or smaller business owners, people who don't have, a big kind of line behind them of people with advice and this kind of expertise they're giving them, is that there will be an experience like this, right? Where you've lost money and whatever it is, maybe you've had a hard time with this. That's a good lesson. You learn a lot from it, and it can help you, from our perspective, right, figure out how do you need to tighten up your contracts? What do you need to put in there that's going to prevent this from happening again? So instead of being reactive, like, oh, they didn't pay me, what do I do? We can be more proactive. And honestly, there's a bunch of different kinds of creative methods you can go with, right? Let's say in this case, right, this is a person who, well, you have no idea where they even are, right? That kind of thing. And it's a small amount of money. So it might have been helpful to have smaller late fees or smaller kind of interest bearing things along the way, where when you personally just send them a letter like, hey, you haven't paid me. Hey, I still know where you are. Don't threaten them like that, because that sounds like I'm in the mob. But where you can say, like, listen, right now you're only 15 days late, right? I want to work this out with you. Like, I want to continue to provide you with these services, or, whatever it is you're doing. And that sometimes is a little bit more leverage than just like coming after them when it's 3 months later and you're like, you owe me $1,000 or something, which can be a lot harder for someone in that position to handle.
Yeah. Well, let's take a hard pivot. Take me back. Where'd you grow up?
Okay, so I'm a swamp person, and so I am from Orlando, Florida. Yeah. And it was a really hard place for someone as pale as I am and vitamin D deficient to grow up, I will say. When I first moved to Richmond, everybody kept saying, you know, like, we're right on the river and it's so humid and you're going to hate it here. And I haughtily laughed in people's faces because, again, I'm from the swamp. And now I've been here for 7 years, and they are exactly right. When I go back to Florida for holidays or to visit my family, as soon as I am outside of the airport, I am dying. So yeah, I grew up in Orlando, but I also went to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you said haughtily laughed.
Haughtily.
Haughtily. I just want to make sure
Not just
you weren't saying
haughtily.
hot, like as a hot person, I laughed at them.
I'm very confident, but I'm not that confident. So no,
But you are haughty.
Yes, I will admit to that. It's good to know yourself. So I think that's fine. But I also went to undergrad there. I went to University of Central Florida, which at the time I was there, I don't know about now, but it was like the second biggest school by population after, I think, Arizona State.
Isn't it a big party school?
All of Orlando is a big...
Yeah.
yeah,
I feel like it's known as one, if I'm not
so
mistaken.
it is, but I hated, in my first year, I think actually my first semester, I didn't have a major yet. I was undeclared and I was kind of figuring out what I was going to do. And I hated being in these huge classes. I had a psychology class. Shout out to the professor. I won't say her name because she actually was great. But it was like 450 people. So I would never sit next to the same person in the class. I never got to know anybody. My amazing professor had like a little Britney Spears mic on, so you could even hear her in the back.
You can shout her out if you want.
I can't shout her out.
Okay.
I can't. I won't do it.
Okay.
I'm worried about defamation. The defamation of
You're
she had a
saying
Britney
nice
Spears
things.
mic. Yeah, and you know what defamation is not? It's when you say something that's a true fact. So anyway, that's not the only element. Don't rely on that. It's not legal advice. But
Yeah.
I didn't like...
Careful.
None of this is legal advice. I didn't like the big kind of class, like anonymous environment.
How could you? 450?
Yeah.
I mean, even 100 is too many.
Yeah. And so, it definitely is. And so I, because it's Orlando, right? We were the second best hospitality school after, I think, Cornell in the US. So we did have a separate campus that wasn't the main campus just for hospitality that was down by like all the touristy stuff, right? It wasn't outside of Orlando, which is where UCF really is. It was more like by International Drive and the theme parks and all that kind of stuff. So I picked my major purely based on that. And went to the much smaller campus where the classes were smaller, where I got to know people, and I loved it. So I started out thinking, and it was hospitality and event management, right? Was my dual major. I started out thinking I was going to do, you know, just events, maybe festivals, things like that, because I like going to them, so why not plan them? And then ultimately, I studied abroad in Angers in the Loire Valley in France and had to take these wine classes. Also took a class, side note, called Castles of the Valley, which was incredible. It was all field trips to Castles of the Valley. But I got into wine there even more than, you know, I already was because I was only, I think, 20 at the time. And the drinking age there was not 21. So I couldn't drink here, but I could drink there. So I started learning what wine actually tasted like.
Good wine.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's no bad wine there.
My favorite wine still to this day is from there. And you can only get it imported here. There it was like 15 euros. Here it's like $75.
Yeah.
Like, so I just don't do it. But, well, occasionally. Sometimes you got to splurge. But, okay, so I
By
liked...
the case.
Well, all right. Well, okay. Costco method,
That
but sure.
That might take down some of like the importing fees there. I don't know, maybe.
I mean, that's
I'll go in with you. We can talk about it after the pod.
Okay, yeah, well, because I don't want to release what it is, because
Yeah.
then the people will make a run on Total
Sure.
Wine or
like
something.
a great restaurant in town
Yeah.
that you don't know about.
In
Yeah.
all sincerity, there is a restaurant in town, and they're my client, that has this wine
okay.
in their bar. And I'm
you
not
don't
going
wanna
to,
say?
I will
Will you tell
absolutely
me
not
off
say.
mic?
I can't say, here's why I won't say, because my clients are confidential. Unless they've
Right.
publicly said, you know, they're my client or anything like that. I'm never going to tell people who I'm
That's
representing.
true.
So,
That's true.
yeah, I know.
Well, you can't, just so you know, it's really rude to tease people about delicious food and then be like, oh, I can't tell you where it is.
Yeah, I know.
Just so you know.
I do know. And I still did it. So, but okay, so.
Very rude.
So this is like a very roundabout way to say. So I was on a full scholarship in undergrad. And so I had one more semester
Humble
of
brag.
scholarship left. What did you just say?
Humble brag.
Oh, I thought you said humble grad. I was like, no, it was undergrad. So, well, the reason it matters is because I came back from study abroad and I had one semester left on my scholarship. So I was like, well, I'm just going to take back-to-back wine classes at the event and hospitality management school. So
They had those?
Yeah, they did. And so
Like to train like sommelier, like
yes,
people who were turning
I
into
studied
that?
to be a sommelier. So
Yeah.
that's what I thought I was going to do when I got back is, I had gotten into all of this stuff, still was doing events, but I was like, I think I'm going to be a sommelier. Like, that's so fun. And I hate red wines. This is a terrible job for me, but
You
it's
hate red
fine.
wines?
I don't. Yes, I do.
In France?
I hated them less in France,
Yeah.
but I will tell you how I started not hating them is actually when I got back, because in France my wine classes were more like exploratory, just have some wine and let's
Yeah.
talk about it and the notes and all this good stuff. And then here I had one class that was not here but in Florida had one class that was history of wines, and so we would have these wines that had been cloned from amphora that they found at the bottom of the ocean that the Phoenicians had and a spoiler alert, it was disgusting. Love the Phoenicians, don't love their wine. I mean, they're pioneers, but it is what it is. And then I had another class where we had a final that was to taste 6 different types of wine and to identify, say the tasting notes, all that good stuff, but identify not only what type of wine it is, but the grape it came from, the varietal. And so over the course of that semester, which was my last semester, and by the way, I was trying to go to law school afterwards, so I didn't want my GPA to go down. So I was like, I can't fail this wine class. There's no way. So it was just constant. And I don't recommend, doing that in your final semester of school, but it was fun. And even now the wines I still don't drink, and it's been a very long time since then. My friends still will ask like, well, I like this, what else might I like, or what will pair with this? And even when it's the stuff I don't like, I'm like, well, you probably want a Pinot Noir, but so it's a useful skill to have.
That is useful.
Yeah.
Were you doing anything creative in your youth? Were you plays or anything like that?
How could you tell? Well, number one, I'm an only child, so I've always been weird. So, and like made up my own little,
Explains
games.
so much.
I know, right? You do not want to see me play The Sims. It's a bloodbath. But so I would always make up my own little games and things like that. But in high school, I did theater. I did a TV production. So I did the morning announcements. I did radio, weirdly, because my school had a radio magnet program. So yeah, I was definitely creative is such a nice way to put it. I was definitely doing some creative stuff then. And then in undergrad, not as much because I was just a lot busier, working and all that kind of stuff. But, well, I mean, there was a lot of wine, so.
Did you ever do drama?
In undergrad?
Yeah, I mean,
No.
Did you ever do drama in high school?
Yes.
Talk about it.
Oh, okay.
What'd you do?
Shout out to James Brenlinger. I will shout him out.
Defamation.
Yeah, okay. It's not defamation to say a fact. It's just a shout out. But so I had this theater teacher who was a lot of people's favorite teacher, right? He was just, number one, a really fun person. You wanted to be in his class, which I think is a necessary trait for a drama teacher, I guess. But he would also let our students, our seniors, direct their own shows. And so they would, kind of like pitch these shows they wanted to direct. And sometimes it would be a play that's already established. Sometimes it would be like a brand new, something they created, they wrote. And so that was really cool. We were very active in thespian competitions in our state. And I wasn't really super active, honestly, in theater, but I was orbiting it and having a lot of fun there, and a lot of my friends were. And so I would go to the competitions and stuff like that. Did crew stuff in the back where you're wearing all black and you're just moving stuff around. And it was a good way for me, again, as an only child and a weirdo, to make friends. Some people I was friends with there I am still friends with, including my best friend in the world. So it was very fun. Yeah, I highly recommend that. I highly recommend like theater. I know a lot of people do band, music, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of activities you can get involved in. You'll notice I didn't say any sports. That's okay. But I think theater, it's really...
It's the same team dynamic.
It is, but it's such a unique way to connect with people because it's so embarrassing to act.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so embarrassing to try to be like vulnerable or to try to be somebody that you're not intentionally, right? Especially when you're in high school because you're often playing like adults and stuff like that you have no experience with their life experience. So it was a really good way for me to get over being embarrassed by just being a human being and existing. And once you intentionally embarrass yourself in front of a group of people, how are you not going to be friends with them?
It's a great way to make friends.
Yeah.
When I moved to Norfolk by myself, didn't know anyone, it was for a job. I auditioned for a play.
Yeah.
And those are my friends for my entire time in Norfolk. Those people from that first play.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, really, like, we ended up doing more plays together, and yeah, I mean, it's a terrific way to make friends. And yeah, we've touched on that in this podcast before. The vulnerability of theater, the embarrassment is what brings people together. But it is very much like a team sport, and it goes over most people's heads when you're talking to them in the theater, but I will frequently use sports metaphors when I'm talking to like non-theater majors about performance things, and I think it's a great way to connect with them, like I will frequently I'll use a LeBron James analogy, and I'll see, people go, and then the theater people like,
I'll just... Google's free for everyone. Let me just see who that is. No, I'm just kidding. I do know who that is. I don't know anything more.
At this point, pretty much everyone knows who LeBron is and that he's associated with basketball. But
doesn't he have like a son that's doing some stuff with him? Okay, I'm
sorry.
So
much drama there.
I know nothing.
No, he basically, I think this is either going to be LeBron's last year or next to last year. And he wanted to be the first father-son duo to be playing on the same team at the same time. Okay. So they got Bronny James out of college early to come to the NBA. And everybody's like, he ain't ready.
So what about, like, Michael Jordan missed his opportunity there, I guess? Like, he couldn't have done the first father-son?
I don't think his son was into basketball the same way that Bronny is. I mean, Bronny's been a highlight reel on TikToks since he was like 14. Probably.
Bronny is an adorable name.
It is a good name. I think it's LeBron James Jr. Yeah, but he goes by Bronny. Yeah.
That is so cute.
Yeah, it is a good nickname.
All right, I'm becoming endeared. Even though I don't know anything about him, he could be awful. This is not defamation.
Yeah, I don't know anything about him either, and I feel bad for him, honestly, because I feel like he was set up for failure by his dad. I mean, sorry.
No,
don't want to.
No, that's an opinion. That's not defamation, so don't worry.
I think I can talk about LeBron as long as I don't talk about Taylor Swift. I feel like I'll be fine.
No further comment.
So you kind of talked about it a little bit when you were talking about school, but what made you decide to go to law school?
I always wanted to go to law school, and I knew that, from when I was pretty young. My mom went to school to be a paralegal, and so and this is when I was maybe 5 or 4-ish. So I remember when she was studying for that, and I think that's when I got introduced to the idea. The very annoying thing that people always say when you're an argumentative child is that you should become an attorney, which is wrong. Do not do that. We don't need attorneys who are just rude, although we have a lot. So I heard that a lot, and I think I was probably internalizing it in a way I didn't realize. But I always wanted to do more transactional stuff too, which is confusing to people who go to law school. In law school, I had people ask me why I went to law school if I didn't want to do litigation. Like, there is no place for, walking with somebody and preventing them from getting into trouble, as opposed to, it's very great to fix things when they've already gone out of control. But if you don't have to get to that point, maybe don't. So I knew that I wanted to go. I initially actually thought I was going to go to New Orleans, either to Loyola or Tulane, because I loved New Orleans. I would go there all the time in high school. And
could you drive there from where you were?
It was about 8 hours or so, I would say. Maybe a little bit longer. It's been a while since I've been there from there. But yeah, my best friend and I would go. I mean, for a while we were going multiple times a year. I loved New Orleans, which is insane because now going to Florida, I'm like, the humidity here, it's absolutely not. So anyway, all that to say, I did visit Tulane, and when I was there, this is when I was still undeclared in my undergrad. And I was like, should I do poli-sci or, government or something? What should I be majoring in if I want to come here? And basically was told, absolutely not, because you're not going to stand out. Everybody does that. So instead, major in something that you like and that you want to do and that you can show that you were involved with, right? And justify how that's going to help you maybe. But if you want to stand out, don't just do what everybody else is doing. And that's part of why I did hospitality and event management. I mean, I had grown up around it in Orlando. And again, the smaller campus was very appealing to me. So I was excited about that part too. But, the wine stuff, the like wedding planning, festivals, all that kind of stuff, I helped plan openings of businesses and things like that. I dealt with vendor contracts all the time and vendor management and things like that in planning festivals and seeking sponsorships, right? So you're kind of cold calling or you're just going up to people and trying to talk to them. And so there's kind of a sales element too. A lot of the stuff that I actually have ended up doing now. And so because I took that advice to heart and was just like, all right, fine, I'm going to do what I want to do and I'll figure out a way to kind of tie it back in and I'll figure out a way to transfer those skills. I mean, I don't think this is the only reason, but I also got a full scholarship to a couple law schools. And I decided, law school is very expensive. The school I went to, I think at the time it was like $60,000 a semester, or maybe 50. I can't remember because again, I had a scholarship. But I was like, there's no way I'm taking on $150,000+ in debt to go to law school. Number one, I'm a first generation attorney. So I don't have, family connections I can rely on to get into a firm. I don't really have the financial backing of my family like that. I have to figure out how I'm going to pay for this. So I only looked at schools that I had full scholarships to. And that ended up being a couple schools along the East Coast, which is where I was pretty committed to staying because my family's, in Florida. I wanted to stay relatively close by, but not stay in Florida. Although I did get into UF and decided not to go there. Sorry, UF. I'm sorry to my mom because, again, I'm an only child and she was hopeful about that. But I knew that I didn't really want to stay in Florida. Florida has no reciprocity with other states, first of all. So once you're barred there, it's not really easy to transition to another state unless you take the bar all over again. So that was unpleasant. I knew I didn't really want to be there forever, so I certainly didn't want to be stuck there. So I ended up deciding New Orleans was not for me because of the weather. And so I looked at, some schools in DC, some schools in Boston, obviously Richmond. It ultimately came down to either Boston College or University of Richmond. And I visited both. I actually did a road trip up the East Coast to stop at this point, I think I had 5 or 6 schools on my list. So I was stopping at all of them. Oh, and actually Richmond was the first school I stopped at. So Richmond is about a 10 or 11 hour drive from Orlando. So it's the first school I stopped at. I'd been in the car for 10 or 11 hours. My legs are cramped. I'm so ready to get out of the car and go to turn into the campus. And there's a sign, a giant sign that said, "Caution, giant spiders on campus." And it had a picture of a real spider. And I was unaware that the mascot is a spider, Webster, shout out. And I almost kept driving because University of Richmond is a little bit in the woods, right? So I was like, okay, I guess this is where the spiders live. And even though I had a leg cramp and even though I had been in the car for 10 hours, I was like, I think I'm just gonna keep going. I don't really need to stop here in Spider Town. But luckily, when I turned in to turn around, okay, I saw the little illustrated spiders. I was like, clearly this is the mascot. I didn't do my research before coming here. So I almost didn't end up at the place that I still live 7 years later because of a sign that I thought was about real spiders. But anyway.
But only a future lawyer would be able to figure that out. So
that's right.
Kudos to you.
Yes. I've really turned those observational skills into an asset, I will say. And learn to be braver. But I was between Richmond and Boston College ultimately. And what it came down to is, number one, cost of living in Richmond is way lower than it is in Boston. And so even having a scholarship, there's still cost of live. I still have to pay for rent and stuff like that. So there was that. And then also it was so freaking cold there.
Oh my gosh.
No.
The opposite of what you're looking at, what you're going from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, now Richmond is as far north and as far south as I need to be. It's humid, sure, but it's not as humid or hot as Florida. We get one snow a year. I don't have to drive in it.
Town,
and
I'd rather live here weather-wise than I would in LA because I think that there's something, I've talked about this on the pod before too, very disorienting about it being the same freaking weather all the time.
That's Florida though. That is Florida. It's
just hot all the time.
Yeah. Because I still go back for holidays and I'll be there in, December and it'll be 80 degrees. I'm like, tell me how. One of the last times I went to Florida, and it must have been, and actually not one of the last times because it must have been last winter, but I left Richmond and it was one of the only snows. It was snowing here and it was during the day. And I
had to bundle up.
Had to bundle up, but the sun was out, right? So it was nice out, but it was just kind of chilly. I get to Florida, the sun has gone down, and it's just a regular December day. I walk out of the airport and immediately, even though there's no sun, it's 85 degrees, and immediately I am just glistening beautifully from sweat. So haughtily.
No,
haughtily. Both, a little bit of both, but yeah. So no, it was like the perfect climate. It was a good location. It's not too far from Florida, but it's far enough.
Yeah.
I love the size of the city.
You got to think twice before you make the trip. It's not, you can't just spur of the moment unless
right.
you're that lady who like put on the diaper and
No,
that astronaut lady.
I'm not
you know
that
what I'm
lady.
talking about?
Yeah, and also there was more going on there.
Oh, there's a lot going on there.
So yeah, so I feel like it was the perfect amount of distance from Florida, right? And then I love all the people here. A town of hipsters is great. There's a lot of good food, which I was surprised by. I was worried about that coming from, a place that's very international.
Yeah, boy, did you luck out.
I know.
If you didn't know, yeah.
I accidentally came north to the south is what essentially happened. So I was like, uh-oh, capital of the Confederacy. Right. But no, it's been good. And then, the size of the city, too. I think Richmond is a small city, but it's not super, super small. It's not as small as Orlando, in my opinion. I'm sure that could be fact-checked. Don't do it. And there's always something to do because we're close to D.C., where you can go to West Virginia, be in the mountains in the Blue Ridge Mountains. You can go, over to the coast. You can go down to Charlotte. Like, there's a bunch of places that you can go from here. In Orlando, I could drive 8 hours and still not be out of the state. And then once I am out of the state, well, congratulations, you're in southern Georgia. So there's not a ton to do there, although there is a Fazoli's that I highly recommend going to because there's not one in Florida. Oh, I think that's changed. This is fake news. And then the other direction, I could drive 10 hours and be in the Keys, right? But it's like either way, I'm barely out of the state in the time it now takes me to go completely to a new destination. So.
Yeah, no, there's like nowhere to drive from here that's 10 hours unless you're going to Orlando because New York is only 6 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, New York, that's the other. DC's 2 hours away. New York City's only 6 hours away. And Philadelphia is 4 hours away.
Yeah.
And Baltimore's not bad either. I like Baltimore.
No, okay. I do like Baltimore. I've only been there once, but I did like it. I think it's really good because I love going to concerts, and so if there's something that doesn't come to Richmond, which now we're getting a lot of stuff at Browns Island and stuff like that.
Well, we will be getting even more.
I know. But if we don't get them coming here, they're usually coming to DC or,
Or Charlotte, like you said.
Yeah. I just went to see my favorite effing band in the world, Glass Animals, in Raleigh. Mm-hmm. And first of all, it was the best night of my life. Such a good concert. But it was so easy, quick and easy to drive there and cheap to stay there. You just
did like kind of an overnight thing, like a single night?
I was there for 2 nights. Okay. But even then it was kind of like, I mean, I didn't have to stay for 2 nights, but
we did that at Charlotte recently for the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
Me and the boys. Yeah, it was a good time.
You and the dogs.
Me and the dogs.
But I like it.
D-A-W-G.
Of course. Maybe Z. But I like it because there's so much to do. And if there's not something to do here, there are so many places you can get to where there is stuff to do. Yeah.
Virginia Beach is shaping up quite nicely. Had a bad reputation maybe about a decade ago. It's really turned around. Have you been recently?
No, not recently.
It's great. Like also lots of really great restaurants that were not there even probably 5 years ago. And the oceanfront, the downtown area is getting quite a glam up.
Okay. I think the term is glow up, but I don't think there's anything wrong with glam up.
I'm about to turn 40. There we go. So now let's just jump ahead unless you have any fun law school stories you want to tell.
Absolutely not.
Okay,
it's all
great.
confidential.
So let's jump into, is your first job Dunlap?
No, I actually worked for maybe 6 weeks at a real estate firm doing residential closings and stuff like that. They were very generous to hire me when I had just graduated law school and had not yet passed the bar. It was a small firm and it was actually a really great working environment, but it wasn't the type of law. It didn't end up being the type of law I wanted to do, which I didn't know when I went there, first of all. And I liked that you were doing a lot of the same thing over and over again because you're doing the same kind of transactions. It gave me a lot of confidence in only 6 weeks, right? Because you do the same thing so much, you know exactly what you're doing. But especially during COVID, because this was 2020, once someone buys a house, they're not coming back to buy another house. So you're not having that long-term relationship with your clients, right? You might have a long-term relationship with your referral partners, like with the real estate agents you're working with the title companies, right? Things like that, but not with your clients. And I had done a research project for Trisha Dunlap, who's my boss and the founder of Dunlap Law, when I was in my final year of law school. And that was a pretty complex corporate governance issue and just something that, like, there wasn't any case law on point. There wasn't a statute on point. So it was a lot of research. And so she kind of got to know me through that and my work. After I'd been working at this firm for, like I said, I think about 6 weeks, she reached out to me for a happy hour. I went and met with her at this happy hour. And then by the end of the happy hour, she offered me a job, which now that we are very close, I know she did not come to this happy hour intending to offer me a job. She just wanted to catch up. But she was a solo practitioner at the time. She didn't have any other full-time attorneys. And she was just getting more work than she could handle. And she wanted to expand. And so, when we had that happy hour talking through like what I was doing.
Had you already passed the bar?
No. I had taken the bar, but I hadn't passed the bar yet because it takes a couple months to get results.
Sure.
So that's another thing. She took a huge gamble hiring her first full-time attorney, the first expansion of her firm, someone who was not even licensed yet, right? So luckily I did pass the bar on the first try, but yeah, she didn't know that at the time, and I didn't know that at the time. And so she made me this offer. And I was really torn because, again, I had not yet passed the bar, and I had only been working for 6 weeks at this firm that hired me before I passed the bar, and I felt like I knew what I was doing, and I felt like, it was easy. It was only 9 to 5, which a lot of law jobs are not. Even my job now is not really 9 to 5, right? There's a lot of stuff I do that's outside of that time frame. And so there were a lot of positives to where I was working, and it was a huge risk. I called my career development office person, basically guidance counselor at UR, and was like, hey, here's the situation. What should I do? And actually, to her credit, because this is what she should have said, she was like, don't take this job. This is so risky. So that made me even more confused. But ultimately, I was kind of like, I had to do my own thing. And I think this is the type of person that I want to be when I grow up. So I want her to be my mentor. I think this is the type of law I'm probably going to enjoy a lot more than what I'm doing right now. And if it doesn't work out, well, I'm going to have to make it work out for a little while. Otherwise, it's going to look like I spend 6 weeks at every job I go to before I pass the bar. But luckily, I ended up loving it. It's now been 4 years. I think, how many attorneys do we have now? I think we've got 6. We've got 2 support staff. We're actually expanding right now. We're looking for a litigation paralegal and, some other members of the team too.
If you're listening, apply.
Me. Don't call me because it would be weird if you had my number, but apply. So it's just, everything has grown very quickly. And I feel really lucky that, I made a decision that was a little bit courageous. That was a little bit hard to make. And it worked out so well.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times that is how great things happen, is it takes an act of courage first to get there. So now you're doing a lot of different things.
Yes.
Let's focus on the stuff that would be most applicable to our audience, which are going to be independent contractor artists. Think painters who are selling their products to people, or maybe commissioning with I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but we have a family friend who's a painter, and he basically became a millionaire by contracting with a company to paint all of the paintings in all of their buildings.
Yeah. And
he does maritime paintings. They're beautiful oil paintings. We're going to be getting one soon that my parents don't have room for anymore. And so that's incredible.
Yeah.
Right. But that's like a diamond in the rough, once in a million opportunity. But I think something that people should know that is out there so they can know to pursue. Then we've got the nonprofit arts side. I used to work for Spark. I'm currently working with Firehouse Theater. So there's a lot of organizations in Richmond that could use certainly free legal advice, better lawyers, but I don't even kind of know where to start. I mean, do you have a suggestion of a place to start?
Well, first of all, something you just said, right? That opportunity that the painter has to do kind of more commercial, industrial, it's an industrial size job, not industrial, but work. You would be surprised how you can create something like that for yourself if you're an artist. Because a lot of times people become artists because they're creative, because they love the medium, right? They love whatever they're doing. And they may not be great business people, at least at first. And that's one of the things that you can learn to do. And something like that, where you're like, yes, I love, painting, and I love painting this style and this medium and all this stuff. But how do I how do I make myself more marketable, or how do I make this more lucrative? How do I do more with less time, right? Because you only have 24 hours in a day. And if you're a painter who's hand painting every piece you make, there's a capacity there. You can only do so much, right? So another option is, I know some painters who will create prints of their work, right? And so they'll sell the original work, and that's, going to cost a lot more, right, to get an original. But then they'll also sell prints, and part of that is when you're selling the work, right, that big canvas or whatever, you're selling the work, but you're not selling the copyright that you have to the image. You're not selling your ownership. And so you can continue to license it out, right? Maybe somebody's looking for some artwork to put on like a tote they have or something like that, right? For their business. You can license things out to them. There's all these different opportunities that are more business than art that you can create, but you have to kind of be creative about how you do that even.
And in the instance of the prints, the person who bought the original would have no legal claim over, like if they see, like the exact example you use, the tote bag, they paid, $10,000 for this original, and then they're walking into a festival and they see 200 of these things going out on free tote bags, that they have no legal claim over that whatsoever.
No, the default rule is you do not, right? So you can change this in a contract, of course, like
right.
almost everything. But the default is if you sell someone a canvas that you've painted, you are selling them that physical piece of property, right? You're not selling them the copyright, your ownership to, the thing that you've painted, right? Nothing
Similarly,
like
the person buying the canvas would not have the right to use that image in other ways, right? I mean,
right, to try to license out. Now, what they could do is their actual canvas that they own, they could, loan it to a museum, or they could display it, right? Unless you also contracted to restrict that, because they have the property rights that are vested in that item that they own, right? But they don't own the image that you created. A copyright, now I'm going to get into law stuff, and this is not legal advice. A copyright protects works that are in a fixed medium, right? So a book, the script to a play, right? A song, like lyrics, things like that. Those, a logo actually can be both copyrighted and trademarked. Because the copyright is the design, right? You own the right to the design you created. A trademark is used to identify the source of a good or service to consumers. So you also can have a trademark on that logo that is identified with the goods or services you provide, and no one else can, if you have the federal registration, no one else can use that logo or a confusingly similar one to provide those same goods and services. So when it comes to copyright, owning the actual work itself, right? The default is whoever created it owns it. And that's actually a big thing that probably a lot of your listeners should know. It's one of the things I'm going to talk about tomorrow at the public relations event, is that if someone creates a logo for you, even if they're an independent contractor, if you haven't specified that that's a work for hire, or you haven't somehow contracted to shift those rights over to you, by default, they typically go to the person who created it, right? So sometimes that's the way that the designer wants it to be. They want to own the ownership rights, and they want to license it to you, and they can do that in perpetuity. They can do that for no money, right? So they can make it accessible to whoever it is that they're creating the work for, but they want to retain the ownership rights. You could also contract so that upon creation, because you're paying them, right, you get the ownership rights and they don't get any rights other than what they bargained for, which might be to still be able to display that work in their portfolio, right, to put it on their website, whatever it is that you want to contract for.
Yeah, I contract for being able to put my videos on my website or in demo reels or whatever. You've kind of already talked about it, but can you give another example, maybe from a different art source, of the difference between copyright and trademark?
Sure. Let me think of one. Okay, so a series of books, right? A series of books that is identifiable, like the Dummy's Guide to, right? There's always something that comes after that, but it's clear that series, you know who the publisher is of that, right? Even if you don't literally know who the publisher is, you know those are coming from the same source. So the books themselves, the actual written books or, ebooks, whatever it is, those can be copyrighted either by the publisher or more commonly by the author, right? So that no one can reproduce those works. No one can print part of it. If someone copies a whole passage out of your book, you can sue them, right? But then the publisher typically will also own the trademark to Dummy's Guide to, because it identifies that it's coming from that publisher, that it's part of a series. So it's like, when you think trademark, think about where am I getting these goods or services? When you think copyright, think about like something that you are consuming or that you're, seeing, observing, that is owned by somebody. I feel like that made it more confusing.
Well, now let me ask you a question in terms of the video department.
Sure.
What would that, is it possible to trademark that?
You could trademark the term, the video department, right? Because that's your brand name.
Right.
That would be difficult to do because it is descriptive.
Yeah.
So there's these different categories of trademarks, right? Ranging from, just descriptive. They're either descriptive of the services or goods you're providing, or it's too generic, right? All the way up to distinctive. And that means, if you've made up VMO, if you've made up a term that doesn't exist, you're very likely to get that trademark if you can show, obviously, what goods and services you're using it with, because it's unlikely anyone else is using it. It's unlikely consumers would be confused about, okay, well, who's providing this service? Because they're like, oh, there's only one of that weird name. For the video department, not only is it a little bit generic, as in it's probably already in use by other, businesses in other states kind of thing.
It was used in Virginia before me.
Yeah. But it also is descriptive of your services, right? You're like a small businesses or large businesses or nonprofits. Video department. So I would be surprised if you applied for a federal trademark for that and you didn't get an office action back from the examining attorney. You can overcome an office action, not in every situation, right? But you can do it. It's not impossible. The office action of too generic or, not distinctive enough, too confusingly similar to something that's already in existence, that's a really, really hard one to overcome. It's really hard. Yeah. Now, what you could do is get a state trademark. If you can't get a federal trademark, you might be able to get a state trademark. It's only going to protect your business name or logo, whatever the mark is within the state, obviously. But the number one, the cost barrier is a lot lower. It's cheaper to do. And number two, the requirements are a little bit more relaxed. The application for that is like a page long to do, right? Versus the federal application is a lot longer. In both cases, you're going to need to show specimens of how you're using the mark, right? So for you, it might be your website that says the video department at the top, and then the page that displays here's the videos I've made for my clients, right? With a service, it's a lot easier because all you have to show really is that you're providing the service legitimately, but that consumers can get in touch with you to get that service and that they know to identify your logo, your brand name, your trademark, whatever it is, with that service. With a good, let's say shirts, tote bags, you have to actually show that you are, selling shirts or, tote bags, whatever it is, with the logo on it or with the brand name on it or under the brand name. And so that counterintuitively can actually be a little bit more difficult to show because a lot of times people want a trademark right away when they think of an idea. And that's before they can show they're using it in commerce because it's before they have those items. And people will try to, show these prototypes or these sample images, right? Where, oh, look, but I'm going to get it printed on this tote bag and it's going to look like this. And AI kind of made this look real. USPTO is not fooled by that. And so you're going to need to wait until you have the actual goods if you want to file a use in commerce, which is a type of application for a trademark. That means you're already using the mark in commerce, right? Consumers can get the goods or services from you right now under this brand name. You could file, if you're not ready, what's called an intent to use. And that's saying okay, I'm not using this mark yet in commerce in the classes of goods and services I'm applying within, but I'm planning on doing it within a certain amount of time. That's useful because once you ultimately get a federal registration, it's actually going to be backdated, the protection, to the date you applied. And it's kind of first come, first serve. So if there's already somebody with an application pending, which by the way, right now it's taking 13 months for applications to get registered from when they get submitted.
For trademarks?
Yeah. It gets backed up. There's a website at the USPTO, uspto.gov. There's a page on their website where they'll tell you where in the process they are of going through applications. And this is because once you submit your application, it gets assigned to an examining attorney. That examining attorney at USPTO is with your application from start to finish. So if you get an office action, it's that specific attorney that you're trying to convince, no, it really is distinctive, or, whatever your argument is. But that means certain attorneys get very backed up, right? They just have longer case logs, or they have more files that end up needing office actions and have back and forths than others. And so, I think as of today, because I was just looking, I submitted a trademark today. So I was just looking to see what the wait time is. It'll say like processing applications from April 2024, right? And so yeah, it takes a long time, but once it is registered, if it ultimately is, your protection's backdated to that first day. And that's why people might want to file an intent to use, even if they're not ready to use the mark in commerce, is if they want to like kind of get in ahead of, it's a good name and it's unique enough that it's not generic, but at the same time, you don't want someone else to take it while you're in this, development phase or whatever. It can make sense to file an intent to use application. It's really important to know that there's a fee associated with coming back to update that application to say, okay, now I'm using it in commerce, using the mark in commerce, and you're not going to get registered until you can show that.
Until you can show
that you're using the mark in commerce.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right. What about, without going into too much detail, what about something like the BAC, where it's not like an actual, that's the coalition thing that we've been talking about,
yes.
where it's not an actual like business entity?
So, okay, I have some thoughts on that. There are different kinds of marks. A trademark, right, shows that you're the source of these goods or services that are being provided to the public. There's something called a certification mark, too. There are a couple different marks like this, and one of them is one that identifies associations, right? But there's something called a certification mark, for example, where if you are a certifying body of something, right? You're someone who gives out a seal that says, like, the members of this body or the people who've taken this test are qualified, right? It's harder to get than a regular trademark because you have to show that you have created standards, that you are enforcing those standards, and that people in the industry recognize your mark with a marker of quality or something like that, right? So what you're talking about, and that would not quite be, a certification mark, but it would be a mark associated with a trade association, which is,
Yep.
Yeah. And so the way you would get that mark is by demonstrating that, use in commerce doesn't just necessarily mean like people are purchasing from you, right? It means you would demonstrate that you have the types of members who are members of this association, that they belong to the association. Maybe they pay a membership fee, maybe they don't, right? So it's not necessarily money-based, it's more recognition-based.
That makes sense to me. In terms of, we're kind of like approaching the end of our time here. And I think the like wrap up question can also be tied into what like is my next question. So I've got like basically
what do you think
two
happens
more
when
questions.
You die? You are going to ask that, right?
That's for off the pod. That's when you're going to tell me what the restaurant was. So the wrap up question is, what advice do you have for artists who want to pursue their passion as a profession? That's the wrap up question. So if you want to answer from the perspective of like independent artists, would love to hear it. But what I'm really interested in, because me and my wife are so heavily involved with nonprofit arts organizations, is what advice would you have to either a nonprofit, let's just say like a Virginia Rep, and we don't have to get into the specifics of that, but one that is publicly struggling financially and needs to turn themselves around. Or let's just say it's a new nonprofit. Let's just say I want to start a theater company as a nonprofit arts organization. What sort of advice would you give to make that be as successful fiscally as possible?
So I'll start with the business and then I'll go into nonprofit. I think for individual artists, right, or smaller businesses that are involved with art, you want to delegate. Number one, very annoyingly, I often say you don't know what you don't know. I didn't come up with that, but I do say it a lot.
I've heard that a lot in my life, honestly. And I'm usually annoyed when I hear it, or at least the younger you are when you hear it, the more annoyed you are. But the older you are, the more you appreciate it.
Well, the more you realize it's true.
Yes.
So for that reason, I think delegation is really important, actually for two reasons. Number one, because you are not an expert in everything. It's really easy to get into trouble or to get in over your head. And so, if you're an artist, you know your art, you know you're good at that. You may not know how to do taxes. You may not know, how to form a legal entity that's actually going to protect you. Things like that. I think the more that you can delegate, which is easier said than done, it's kind of hard to give up control sometimes, or to afford it, right? Especially when you're starting out. But the more that you can do that, number one, you're taking stuff off of your plate that frees you up to do more of what you want to do and what you can do to grow your business. And number two, it's more sustainable, right? The more, again, the capacity issue, right? You have 24 hours in a day. If you bring someone on to help you, suddenly you have that person's 24 hours too. Although no, you don't, because that is working too much. But
There are laws against that.
that's so true. I've never heard of them, but I'm sure they exist. No, I'm just kidding. But okay, so that's...
And let me just add on to that while you're
Yes.
thinking about the next thing you're going to say is for the business owners. Oh my God, I just completely blanked on what I was going to say. For the business owners, it's really important to you should have two focuses, right? You should have the focus of doing what you do and doing that well. Like for me, that's being a videographer. I should be a very capable editor, very capable shooter. So that's my one focus. And then the other focus that I have is growing the business.
Yes.
But there's so many other things that a business owner has to do too. Like you said, legal, accounting, whatever, that you have to delegate, sub those things out, find some people. And especially like on the accounting side or the bookkeeping or whatever, there are really affordable options out there, that are just
Yes.
small business owners, mom and pop shops mostly. A lot of the bookkeepers around town sort of work that way. They're just independent contractors. So there's lots of good options. So I'll let you continue.
Well, and one of our very good friends says, right, if you have to work in the business and work on the business, right? So those are two very important components. I think, unfortunately, a lot of times people think of, specifically speaking from a place of legal advice, that it's inaccessible, that they can't afford it until something has gone horribly wrong and they have to come to us. And that's really unfortunate because we'll see where people, start an LLC and there's two people who are working together. They call themselves business partners, even though they're not in a partnership. They'll go on LegalZoom. They'll print out a partnership agreement. I'm sorry, you have an LLC. You're not partners. That doesn't even apply to you. Now, the default rules under the Limited Liability Company Act here in Virginia do. Those are not very favorable to you. And we're in a huge mess. We only even know this because something has gone wrong and you've come to us with this agreement that doesn't even apply to you. So I think there certainly can be a place for self-help when it comes to legal stuff, and things that you can do on your own or things that you can separate out of what you're having done that you can, either delegate to somebody else or that you yourself can do. But it's the figuring out, which of those things is possible for you to do without putting yourself in danger and which isn't. That's very difficult if you don't know what you're doing when it comes to the law.
Yeah.
And then turning to nonprofits, one of the biggest things for nonprofit board members to understand, and more importantly for nonprofit founders, is that nonprofits do not have owners, right? The public or the community that is being served, but more broadly the public, is the owner of a nonprofit. So a lot of times founders get founder syndrome and they think, well, this is my baby. I started it. I put in all the startup money, so I'm in charge and no one can remove me. And this is, running under my rule. And if you're a 501c3, the IRS says, no, that's not true. And you're going to get into a lot of trouble. So it's important when you're putting together a new nonprofit, right? Even if you're the founder, but even if you're one of the initial board members, when you're crafting that board and figuring out who's going to serve, yes, it should be people who are passionate about the mission. Yes, it should be people who care about what you want to do, but it also needs to be people with different areas of expertise, right? You might want to have an accountant on your board, or at the very least, that you've engaged with on the back end, similar to just anyone in any other type of industry, right? You want to have diversity of perspectives. You want to have diversity of expertise. You want to have people who are committed, but you also need to understand that as a director on a board of directors, you owe fiduciary duties to the nonprofit, right? And so if you're not making decisions that are in the best interest of the nonprofit, if you're not, very carefully considering what you're going to do before you make a decision and not just rubber stamping something because the founder said so and they installed you on the board because they knew you'd just say yes. Not only are you endangering the longevity of the organization, but you're also putting yourself at risk for personal liability. So you don't want to have personal liability because you agreed to be on a board of directors because you cared about something and you got mixed up in something you didn't understand. So it's really, really important to understand what your rights and obligations, more importantly, obligations, I would say, are as a director. Just because you love a cause and it's really important to you, that's unfortunately not enough, right, when it comes to the legal world. So, I think there's no point in starting an organization, a nonprofit, if you don't care about its mission, right? So almost everybody who does that does, but you need more than that.
Well, and also, as you said, that person who started it might not be in control 20 years down the road.
Yeah.
And so the new people who come in might not
That's right.
I'm just curious, like in a situation where a nonprofit board has like hasn't fulfilled their duties, what is like a course of action? Like what would happen?
So if your nonprofit has members, which here in Virginia, a nonprofit has to be organized as what's called a non-stock corporation. So it is a corporation, but as evidenced by the name, there's no stock, right? There's no shareholders, which ordinarily in a stock corporation, the shareholders would have the right to sue the directors on behalf of the business for breach of fiduciary duties, right? So in a non-stock corporation, nonprofit, if there are members, those members have that right? So they're not owners, but it depends on who you define as a member. It could be people that the nonprofit is serving could be members, right? It's all identified in that nonprofit's articles of incorporation, which are publicly available. You can see if a nonprofit has members, theoretically, although a lot of times when people form their own nonprofits, they say, we're a member organization, and then their bylaws or something will say, no, we're not. And that's actually frequently an issue we run into, whether there are members with rights or not, right? When we're reviewing existing governance documents. But also, guess what? The IRS cares about what you're doing because they're giving you tax exempt status. And so they don't want any of those tax exempt funds to be used for the benefit of any individual, right? To be used for anything that's not the charitable purpose that your nonprofit was formed and organized to further. So that's another way, actually, that directors get into trouble is not just by breach of fiduciary duties, but by actually taking a private benefit of some sort from the nonprofit, from the tax-exempt nonprofit, in a way that the IRS does not allow.
Are there ways for a founder, like let's say you are a founder of a very successful arts nonprofit, your budget is $500,000, but you earn like $1 million that year. Is there a way for a founder to like get a bonus or whatever?
Okay, so that's very fact specific because a lot of times what founders will do is they'll instill a board of directors, right, who are the directors who are actually in charge. They have the authority to make decisions on behalf of the organization. And then the founder themselves will sometimes be an executive director. And contrary to the fact that director is in that name, they don't necessarily have to be a director on the board of directors. They're an officer, usually, or an employee, right, of the non-stock corporation. So it is okay to pay an executive director, right? Typically, you don't get paid for your service on a board of a nonprofit, right? It's kind of a volunteer position as a director. The directors delegate the authority to carry out, they make the decisions, and then they delegate the authority to actually carry out the day-to-day operations that put those decisions into effect to officers. So that could be, an executive director, a secretary, whoever it is. So,
but employees, not board members.
Well, officers who almost always are employees,
Right.
but they don't have to be.
Okay.
Yes. But you can think of that for purposes of this example. Think of them like an employee. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the board then would vote to set the executive director's compensation as an employee, right? And so in a nonprofit especially, you want to make sure that salary, that compensation that's going to the executive director is kind of like market rate, right? What are other people making in this position, in this industry, in an organization this size, right? And as a director who could be personally liable if you do this wrong, you want to document all of the reasons you're making that decision, why you think it's reasonable to pay them what you're paying them, right? If you have a particularly good year, and unless there's something that says otherwise, right, in your bylaws, in their employment agreement with the executive director, whatever it is, there's nothing to stop that board of directors from giving the executive director a bonus. But they should be thinking about whether that extra money would be better served going towards the charitable purpose of the organization too. And sometimes, right, it can make sense to give that bonus. Maybe this executive director has been doing so well and really making things go well for this organization, and you want to retain them.
Exactly. If they're doing all the fundraising or whatever. It's like they brought in $1 million for the company, but their salary is $100,000.
Yeah.
But you have $400,000 extra dollars, like maybe throw them a little bit or her a little bit to like kind of incentivize them to do as good next year.
That's right. Yeah. But I will tell you, right, that part of the calculation of, okay, are we paying this executive director enough when you set the compensation might be, well, what are our revenue? Part of it is what are our revenues, right?
And if we meet those goals, but the bonus is already built into the contract.
It could be, but even if it's not, even if it's discretionary, it can make sense to revisit the compensation when that revenue factor changes, right? So it's not unreasonable to do that. But if you suddenly start paying the executive director an amount that's like 3 times what anyone else in the same role at a similar size organization with the same kind of revenue or something like that is making, that's going to be very hard to justify as a well-reasoned decision.
Sure. No, that makes total sense. Yeah, I've just always kind of wondered. I heard from a nonprofit, I think executive director, who we know, that they said something that I thought was really fascinating, and it's really stuck with me, that nonprofit status is basically, it's just like any other business. Just the structure of it and the way that taxes is handled is different, but you're still trying to make money as a nonprofit. Yep. So in the example, if your budget is $500,000, that's what you're trying to earn, and you hit it in July, you don't stop.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. You should not stop.
Yeah, you keep going.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm just trying to like figure out, and like that's kind of why what I've talked about with some of these nonprofit owners is like, there's
not
this,
owners.
You're right. I'm sorry, nonprofit directors, and most of the people are not even founders.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say. What was I just talking about?
How a nonprofit is still a business. They're still trying to make money.
Yeah, and just how the scarcity mindset. I heard that term used recently from, I think it was from a nonprofit consultant who I've spoken with, and how the scarcity mindset can really cripple you in terms of your ceiling. And when you're in a business that has, especially if you have like a space, if you have a location, you are already connected to the community or something like that, like you should be trying to figure out ways to raise your ceiling.
Yeah.
Like not just like, how do we meet the ceiling? Like, how do we raise it?
Unless you don't want to, right? Because there are nonprofits
Sure.
that have really, really specific missions in mind. And when they make money that goes beyond what they have the capacity and what they want to do, now that doesn't mean they should stop making money. That means
donate it, right?
Donate it to other
Yeah.
nonprofits,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And then that's actually a big issue is, let's say you decide to dissolve a nonprofit, right? Any assets that the nonprofit owns, I mean, this is in your articles, right, of incorporation, they can only go to another 501c3 or another nonprofit, right? So sometimes people think, okay, well, I founded this nonprofit and I initially put some property into it, right? I donated undeveloped land I had to it, right? And the nonprofit built a building on it and the nonprofit owns the building. And I'm going to dissolve the nonprofit. So now I'm going to give this land back to myself or whatever. No, you're not, because that's a private benefit from tax exempt dollars that, you're going to get in trouble for, right?
Could you keep the land and lease it to the nonprofit?
You can do that. You want to make sure it's really important in that case to have a third party where you have an outside appraisal where you can show that you're leasing the land to the nonprofit at market rate, right? That you're not benefiting from the tax exempt dollars of the nonprofit by charging it a ton of money to lease the land back to it, stuff like that.
Sure.
It's all about documentation and making sure that, yes, you're making these very well-reasoned decisions, right, that are in the best interest of the nonprofit, but you need to be able to show that you're doing that, right? People can't see inside of your head. So at your board meetings, right, you need to have detailed minutes about here's what we discussed, here's the documentation we reviewed, here's the expert opinion we relied on, all that kind of stuff that shows we take our job really seriously and we're not just here to try to get, free tax-exempt dollars to do whatever we want.
Right. No, that's excellent. I hope that people will listen to this and take from it some things that they can help to improve their business. But also, what I really hope is that they will come hire you.
Please do.
To help them with their businesses, and we can continue to spread Dunlap law throughout the nonprofit arts community.
I would be happy to. And again, I'm a theater nerd, so really, you're in good company.
Is there anything you want to shout out before we go?
Is there anything I want to shout out? Oh, goodness. I wasn't really ready for this.
It's okay. You can shout out Dunlap Law.
I would love to shout out Dunlap Law, actually. I will say one thing that's important, and you hear me say this every week, but not everybody does, so, is the way that we serve our clients, right? Business owners, nonprofit directors, people who want to found a nonprofit, right? And that is with an emphasis on empathy, education, and empowerment. So what that means is, if you call me, number one, I'm fun to talk to. You're going to like it. You're not going to dread and not want to call your attorney because you're, it's like, oh, it's this 12 million year old person who is awful to talk to and doesn't text me back. The empathy piece is listening to whatever is going on, whether it's a challenge you have in your business or nonprofit, right? An opportunity that's upcoming, just what else is happening in your life, right? A 15-minute conversation. Because again, you don't know what you don't know. And part of my job is to identify, okay, well, here's something that could become an issue and here's what you should be considering. Or, here's an opportunity that you actually have based on what you've said that maybe you haven't thought of yet. So that's the empathy piece, right?
And kind of the education.
Well, yeah, because the education piece is I'm not just going to tell you what to do, right? I'm going to talk to you about what your goals are, and then I'm going to talk to you about how you can achieve them. But I'm going to tell you why I'm giving you the advice I'm giving you, right? So you're not just like, okay, well, I guess I'll do this because Brandy said so, but why? And then, empowerment, right? So that kind of comes from the education piece. The more that you know the reasoning behind what you're doing, and the more that you become familiar with identifying, what could be a potential issue and when to call your attorney, right? Okay, I just need to call and have a 5-minute conversation and just check in and see if there's an issue, the more empowered you become to make those decisions on your own without fear of, okay, well, I started this LLC so that I would be protected from liability. And now I'm finding out there's this thing called piercing the corporate veil where actually someone can take my house and my personal name, and what's the threshold for that, and when do I need to be worried, right? It's kind of the peace of mind of having somebody that you trust in your corner that you want to talk to, and that's what we try to be to our clients.
Excellent. Well, I think you've demonstrated here today wonderfully, haughtily. How knowledgeable you are about this. So thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Yeah, thank you for having me.